All right, thanks again for putting on your masks, and my daughter appreciates it, and my grandkids. Band pick of the week this week is Lake Street Dive. Has anybody heard Lake Street Dive? Good. That's so the purpose of the band picks of the week are a band that you guys maybe haven't heard of. It's sort of a good band to listen to. And sometimes people will send in their nominations for band pick of the week. So if you have a new band or something that you think is pretty good, I'll take a listen to it and see if it's something that I want to put forth as the band pick. They are a sort of an alternative rock band. They have this lead singer's a female that really has a soulful sound to it, so you might want to get on their website and just take a look. They have a new album that they just came out in March, so you might take a look at that. And I'm go ahead take roll today. Just I guess we'll take roll sort of randomly. There's too many people to take roll every day, but just to make sure that people are attending here. Okay, Joshua. Harrison, Jean-Luc, Joseph Bentley, Mark Bergeron, Nathaniel Bly, oh, there you are, okay, Stephen Edelbut, okay, Drew, Julius, I think I forgot to bring my reading glasses just in case. Joseph, Luke Keller, Rachel, Jackson, Tom, Nicholas Slowly. Okay. Camilla. Is it Camilla? No. Okay, Camilla. All right, there's an N. All right. True. John Ortman. Tavio. Alexander. Oh, Alex, right. Okay. Caroline. Sarah. Kevin, Grace, Elaine, and Brianna. All right. Okay, last time we were talking about the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, which says that any competitive equilibrium is at a Pareto-optimal state. And we said that you'd like to be at a Pareto-optimal state because it doesn't make sense to be at a non-Pareto-optimal state. A non-Pareto-optimal state, you'd say, well, gee, I can make somebody better off and no one else worse off, so why wouldn't I go ahead and do that? And so then we said, okay, what are some of the conditions for Pareto optimality? And we noted that at a Pareto optimal state, you can't make one person better off without making somebody else worse off. So there's going to have to be a trade-off, okay? And if we thought about it, there's lots of Pareto-optimal states in the world, right? I mean, in fact, any Pareto-optimal state could be, I could have everything and you have nothing, or you have nothing and I have everything, right? So or you have some and I have, I have some, but to get you more, then you got to take away from me. So there's lots and lots of Pareto-optimal states out there. And when we do, the next thing we're going to talk about is there a possibility of choosing between Pareto-optimal states, right? Can we say, we were talking about extra credit for the class, right? Is there a way that we can say that it's better for the class to have extra credit? So we noted that the first condition of Pareto optimality, like what are the conditions that you need to have it? And so we said the first condition of Pareto optimality is optimality and exchange, and that was what? That the margin utility of x to the margin utility of y has to be the same for everybody, right? That's when we noted that, you know, if you think back to ECON 202, this is what we called the margin rate of substitution, right? The margin utility of x to the margin utility of y. And we noted that why does a competitive equilibrium get you there? It's because we assume, one, we assume that people are utility maximizers. And if you maximize utility, what's got to happen? You've got to have that the margin utility of x to the price of x has got to equal the margin utility of y to the price of y. Okay? And if you're a utility maximizer, and what else do we assume? We assume in Econ 202 that what? You guys are all price takers, right? When you do Econ 202, you're given the price, and then what do? You maximize utility given the price. You can't affect the price by how much you demand, right? And you're such a small component of that aggregate demand curve that your demand moving back and forth doesn't shift the total demand curve. And so what does that say? It says that the margin utility of x to the margin utility of y is equal to the price of x to the price of y, but that thing is the same for everybody. So if everybody's facing the same price ratio and everybody's maximizing utility, then that first condition of Pareto optimality is going to hold. Well, what we're going to do is then we're going to go through and do this a similar method of analysis to look at what happens to get the second condition. And we said the second condition of Pareto optimality was that the margin rate of technical substitution in the production of x has to be the same as if you produce y. Okay? And what was the margin rate of technical substitution? What is that? That's the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital, right? So this condition says that the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital in the production of x has got to be the same as it is in the production of y. And if it weren't, then you could see you can make things better off if you move stuff around. Suppose that the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital were much higher in making x than it is in y. Well, then what do you ought to do, right? If you had the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital in x was bigger than the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital in y, then just like what we said last time when we were talking about the margin utilities, I could give you more x and you give me more y, and we'd be better off. But as I was giving you more x, what happened? We said that the marginal product, if I'm giving you more x, the marginal product of x is going down for you, right? And the marginal product of y is going up for you. And I'm having a marginal product of x going up, marginal product of y going down, and so the things ought to come into equilibrium. Same story here, right? If I have a higher marginal product of labor to capital in the making of x, what I ought to do is I ought to use more labor in x and more capital in y. But similarly, what did you guys assume? Do you assume diminishing marginal products, right? You assume diminishing margin utility when you were taking Econ 202, but you also assume diminishing marginal product, right? So if what's happening is I'm now moving labor in x, what's going to happen? The marginal product of labor is going to be going down. There's less capital over here. The marginal product of capital is going up. I got more capital in y, so what's happening? The marginal product of y is going down. The marginal product of labor is going up. And so what happened is they ought to come into equilibrium. Okay? So if I am not in a situation where the ratio of the marginal products are equal to one another, I ought to move stuff around, and we can see that you're going to come out to, eventually you're going to come into equilibrium. Now, what in the competitive market makes us have this happen, right? In a competitive market, what did we assume? In a competitive market, we assume that the marginal product of labor to the price of labor is equal to the marginal product of capital to the price of capital, or the marginal product of labor to the marginal product of capital is equal to the price of labor to the price of capital. Just like we did with the story's just the same. Instead of being margin utilities and prices, we got marginal products and prices. Well, what happens if you're a cost minimizer, right? If I cost minimize, then this is what's going to happen, right? The marginal product of labor per dollar has got to equal to the marginal product of capital per dollar if I'm cost minimizing. So what did you assume? You assumed that everybody is a cost minimizer that's producing stuff. And you guys were assuming that everybody is a utility maximizer. Now we're assuming that everybody's a cost minimizer. And so what's happening? They're all setting their ratio of the marginal products equal to the ratio of the prices. And what did we assume? Everybody faces the same price ratio. If everybody faces the same price ratio, then they must all be setting their ratio of their marginal products equal to one another. So that second condition of Pareto optimality is going to hold given that people are cost minimizers and given that people are price takers. Okay? So, seem to be making sense here? All right? Okay. Well, now what we're going to do is we could look at the third condition. And the third condition was that the marginal cost of X to the marginal cost of Y, which is we call that what? The marginal rate of transformation. You can think of that, if you remember the production possibilities curve, right? The slope of the production possibilities curve is the rate at which you can exchange X for Y. Because you're getting more X, you're producing less Y along that production possibilities curve. So the rate at which you can swap X for Y in terms of production has got to be equal to the marginal cost. But now the condition that we use to trigger this thing is that the producers profit maximize, right? So first condition happens because we assume that you guys are utility maximizers. The second condition happens because we assume that producers cost minimize. And the third condition happens because we assume that you guys are profit maximizers. Now, if you're profit maximizers, what do? You have the marginal cost of Y to the marginal cost of X to the marginal cost of Y is going to be equal to the price of X to the price of Y. Why is this? Because where do you produce? Right? Everybody produces where price equals marginal cost. That's where you're profit maximizing. What are you doing? You're given the price, okay? And how much do you produce? Well, you keep producing as long as the marginal cost is less than the price. And what did you assume? Increasing marginal costs, okay? So you assumed diminishing margin utility. You assumed diminishing marginal product. You assumed increasing marginal costs. So if I'm given what the price is, how much did you produce, right? You produced as long as the price was bigger than the marginal cost. You keep going until price equals marginal cost, and that's where you maximize profit. So profit maximization has that. So if you're making X, your marginal cost is equal to the price. If I'm making Y, my marginal cost is equal to the price of Y. So the ratio of the marginal cost of X to Y has got to be equal to the ratio of the prices. But we also assumed that all you folks out there are utility maximizers, and you're setting your marginal rate of substitution equal to the price ratio. And as long as the producers and the consumers face the same price, then what's going to happen? The marginal cost of X to the marginal cost of Y is equal to the marginal utility of X to the marginal utility of Y. Okay? So the third condition of Pareto efficiency is going to happen because producers are profit maximizers. Everybody's facing the same price ratio, and so the producers and the consumers are facing the same prices, and so we get that third condition to hold. Notice that that is what you assumed in principles, right? You assumed that the price that you're paying is the same as the price that the producer is getting, and so all those conditions that you assumed in Econ 202 or Econ 303, all those conditions that you assume, diminishing marginal product, diminishing margin utility, increasing marginal costs, everybody facing the same price ratio, all those things generate, in the end, that you get the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, right? All these three conditions for Pareto optimality hold because of these assumptions that you've made and how the competitive market works. Now, question is, why would we, if what we had, if this is true, when do you need government? Like, when does government come in? And those of you, how many had Econ 105? You? All right. So in Econ 105, what do we read? Read Bastiat's The Law. And in the law, Bastiat says that a science of economics must logically precede a science of politics, which I tell the politics professors all the time, right? So the question then is, well, okay, why do you need a government here, right? If these conditions of Pareto optimality hold when you have a market, competitive market, what do you need a government for? Well, you also have, we talked a little bit earlier on about when you get market failure, sometimes these conditions don't hold. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about that. Now, if in public finance, we'll deal with these topics in much more detail than we're going to hear. But we're going to introduce the idea of externalities and public goods as part of this. But the first thing that we, again, if you want to go through the Public Choice Hall of Fame, Francis Bator wrote a paper or a piece in 1958 called Anatomy of Market Failure. And what he was talking about is, okay, when do markets goof up, basically? When do they not give you a Pareto optimal state? So the first condition, or excuse me, the first situation that you're not going to get a Pareto optimal state is what happens if you have a monopoly, right? If you have a monopoly, what happens in a monopoly? In a monopoly, if you think back again to Econ 202, when you look at a monopoly, The monopolist demand curve is what? It's the market demand curve, so it's downward sloping. When you looked at the demand curve for an individual firm in a perfectly competitive market, you drew it that way, right? You could sell all you want at whatever the market price is, okay? So to sell more units, you didn't have to lower your price. So the marginal revenue is whatever the price happens to be. But if you looked at a monopolist, what's going on? They got a downward sloping demand curve. You assume that the market demand curves are downward sloping, right? That's how you drew them. But if the demand curve's downward sloping, what does that mean? It means that the marginal revenue curve is going to look like this, right? Because if I'm going to sell one more unit, what do I have to do? I have to, in order to sell one more unit, I got to lower the price than all the units before. If I had, if you're going to sell, let's say at $5, you can sell, 6 units. In order to sell 8 units, what do you got to do? You got to lower the price to $4. But unless I could perfectly price discriminate, right? In order to, I got to sell to everybody at the same price. I got to have $8 to sell 8 units. I got to lower the price to $4, which means I'm giving up the revenue of $5 on the first 6 that I would have had, and so the marginal revenue is always going to be less than the price. So that you had ECON 202, right? You drew a demand curve, you drew the marginal revenue curve, and so where do you produce, right? You're going to produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, if you're a monopolist. So if you're producing where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, then what's going to happen? It's going to goof up, right? If you think of where does price equal marginal cost? That's what you need for a Pareto optimal situation, right? The price is going to equal the marginal cost, but that's not going to happen if you got a monopoly. If the markets go along and you have a monopoly situation, then what are they going to do? They're going to produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So let me just make that QM. That's the quantity that the monopolist is going to produce. They're going to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Competitive markets, perfectly competitive firm, price equals marginal cost. Monopolist, no. Monopolist, the marginal revenue is less than the price. So when they produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, then the price is going to be up here, and the optimal price would be the $4 here, right? That'd be where the equilibrium price would be. And so I've got a situation here where the monopolist is going to produce QM. But notice, right, at QM, what's the problem? The problem with QM is that remember what is the demand, right? The demand is the marginal benefit curve. Your demand curve is your marginal benefit curve. If I said to you, how many units will you buy at $6, right? You'll keep buying as long as the marginal benefit is bigger than 6. So you're going to stop where marginal benefit equals the price. So if your demand curve is your marginal benefit curve. What's true of the market demand curve, right? It's the sum of the individual demand curves. And so the market demand curve is the demand, is the marginal benefit. If you bought the last, thing of Gatorade, this is just water, right? But if you bought the last Gatorade, then that Gatorade gave you, if it was, $4. Well, I don't know how much does Gatorade cost. $1? I don't know. Let's say it costs $1. So if Gatorade costs $1, you're going to keep buying Gatorades until the marginal benefit is just $1. So you get that last Gatorade, boom, what's the marginal benefit? The marginal benefit to society is the $1. So what our problem here is that for all the units from QM to Q star, what's the problem? The problem is I've got a marginal benefit up here, but the marginal cost is only right there, right? So all those units, the marginal benefit is bigger than the marginal cost. So if you were to take a look at that triangle, if we look at this triangle ABC, this is the marginal benefit minus the marginal cost, and then that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that. So that triangle there is what we would think of as welfare loss, right? It's the triangle ABC is the welfare loss that's coming from a monopoly situation. So what does that tell you? It tells you that a perfectly competitive market results in Pareto optimality, but what if you don't have a perfectly competitive market? Well, then you're going to have a situation where you're going to have too few units being produced. So you're going to get market failure. So what do we have? We have antitrust laws, right? You know, I don't know if you guys are following. There's a big discussion right now going on about social media companies, right? And whether the government should be, you know, is Google now a monopoly, and the government needs to get in and break up those monopolies, right? There's discussion going on right now in the public policy arena about social media companies, and are they should they be regulated, or should they break them up? Okay. Now, so and if you know, that was the case dealing you know, with the Standard Oil and all, you know, back in the day. And even if you look at Mises liberalism, he talks a little bit about when in 1927 he wrote a book called Liberalism in the Classical Tradition, and his discussion about, you know, okay, what conditions might lead to a monopoly, et cetera. So then, you know, again, sort of thinking ahead, is it likely that how does government really know whether this is indeed a monopoly, and are we have some sort of short-run situation? What you know, Hayek talks about in his Constitution of Liberty, you know, is that other firms will enter, right? If you're a monopolist and you're earning economic profit, what's the deal? Okay, other firms will enter the industry, right? And as they enter the industry, it becomes more and more look like a perfectly competitive industry in the end. Well, firms will enter until economic profit's zero. Okay, so you know, that's a case where, you know, this is a case of monopoly is a case where you're going to probably have government intervention, and then, you know, later on we'll talk about you know, government failure. Do we know whether that's right or not? You know, I've done a little bit of publishing about you know, are these social media companies, are they a monopoly? And you know, how do you determine what they are or not? So how do we know that whoever's the head of the you know, the Department of Justice or whatever, how do you know that they're going to be able to figure this thing out? But nonetheless, the point is that there could be a role for government in the case of monopoly, because you're not going to be at a Pareto optimal state of the world. All right, yeah.
So I'm a little confused. Our definition of Pareto optimal was like the simplest definition was that you can't make anyone better off without also making someone worse off, right?
Yep.
So it seems like in order to move from point B to point C, you'd have to make the monopolist worse off, and so point B is also a Pareto optimal state of the world.
Well, the point is that the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics says, hey, competitive markets, Pareto optimal. So why do we need a government? Okay. So the question is, but in the real economy, we don't have perfectly competitive markets. And so that tells you, okay, what we're trying to do here is say, why do we need a government, right? And if all we had was competitive markets, we would have Pareto optimal situation, and then we'd get to the point of, do you want to pick this state of the world over this other state of the world? They're both Pareto optimal. That leads us to this idea of, is there a social welfare function or something that we can figure this out, that this Pareto optimal state's better than that one? But aside from that, we'd like to be at a Pareto optimal state. Monopoly, you're not at a Pareto optimal state that doesn't satisfy those conditions that you need to be at a Pareto optimal state. So you might have a role of government to do that.
So, okay, so then if point B is not a Pareto optimal state, because that's the monopoly point, then it seems like that first definition where you can't make someone better off without making someone worse off isn't actually the definition, and then it seems like Pareto optimal state is just being used interchangeably with Calvert-Hay.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I guess what we're trying to do here is to say what states of the world are not Pareto optimal. Okay, they don't satisfy that condition, and so those three conditions that we gave you that said, okay, those are conditions that are necessary for Pareto optimal state to exist. The competitive market gives you that. Outside of that, then you could express a role of government to get you to a Pareto optimal state. So this monopoly is not a Pareto optimal state. We could rearrange the world to get to a point where I can't make someone else better off without making someone else worse off. Yeah.
But isn't point B that also I can't make anyone else better off without making the monopolist worse off at point B? And so it seems like the definition we used in order to reach our three criteria for Pareto optimality is disproven by this monopoly graph right here, and thus we don't have our three conditions anymore because we just undermined it with the conclusion.
That's a good point. Yeah, if we have a monopoly, what you're saying is if we have a monopoly, then to get rid of that monopoly, then the monopolist is going to be worse off. And so if I were to, the state that we're in, I can't make the rest of the world better off without making the monopolist worse off. And so you're arguing that that is a Pareto optimal state. Okay, that's a very good point. I've not had anyone talk about that. I'll have to think about that one for a while. Okay? All right. Okay. But what we're trying to do here is show you states of the world where you're not at a Pareto optimal state, and therefore, and one of these conditions don't hold, and so the government could put you at a Pareto optimal state. Okay? So in a monopoly situation, you're not satisfying those conditions of Pareto optimality. A second reason that you have that you're not going to be at a Pareto optimal state is what's called externalities. And in an externality, what's going on is that your action either produces a benefit to somebody else that isn't picked up in the price system, or it produces a cost, imposes a cost on somebody else that that's not picked up in the price system. So your action produces a benefit or a cost that's not picked up in the price system. And if we have a positive benefit, that if it's a benefit, we call that a positive externality. And if it's a cost, we call that a negative externality. So if we sort of think about a sometimes the social norm will take care of this situation, right? Let's just think about this for a minute. A social norm may take care of this. And we'll talk about it here in a little more detail in a moment, but let's think about you're going to mow your lawn on a Saturday morning, okay? You know, you're using a lawnmower, and you're not using just a push mower, it's got an engine on it, okay? Actually, I haven't seen a lawnmower in a long time that doesn't have an engine on it, but they used to. How many have ever seen lawnmowers where you just push them? Not all of you? Yeah, well, that's the way they used to work. But anyway, so you've got a lawnmower and it's making noise and it's Saturday morning. How many would say that it's okay to mow your lawn if it was 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday? Not too many. How about 8 o'clock on Saturday? Okay, I've got a few. How about 9 o'clock on Saturday? Okay, by 9 it's but by 10 o'clock for sure, right? So we sort of, you know, the social norm is basically probably in that 9 o'clock range on Saturdays, right? That's just sort of accepted. You know, your neighbor's being a jerk up there at 7 o'clock in the morning mowing their lawn, right? Let's say you're going to have a party and it's going to make, you know, in your apartment, and it's going to make a bunch of noise, okay? You're going to be playing Lake Street Dive music, etc. Okay? How do you take care of that? How do you take care of that in terms of you're going to make noise and it's going to bother your neighbor? Yeah, invite the neighbor, right? That's what you do, right? You invite the neighbor, right? And then it's hard for them to complain. They got invited to the party, right? So, you know, we have social norms that tend to deal with this. But we're going to look at it a little bit in a little bit more detail here to give you an idea of what is the optimal amount of the good that's going to be produced. So let's say you have a power plant, and this power plant produces sulfur dioxide, right? So you have your power plant, and it produces SO2, goes out into the atmosphere. And SO2, it's going out into the atmosphere, and rain happens. And rain is water, and that's H2O. And what do you get? When that happens with rain, you get sulfuric acid, right? And sulfuric acid ends up in the lake, and it kills the fish. And so I've got the fishery is now having a cost that's imposed on it by the production of the power plant. But the power plant isn't considering the added cost to the fishery when the power plant's deciding how much power to produce, right? It's going to produce so long as the marginal cost to the power plant is equal to the marginal benefit to the power plant, right? Which is going to be the price that it's getting. So what does that mean? It means that you're not going to get the optimal amount of the good if what we do is we draw a little we draw a little picture. And what did Rod Stewart say about pictures? No. Every picture's, that's not Rod Stewart. You know who Rod Stewart is, right? The singer? No? You haven't heard of Rod Stewart? Oh my gosh. I don't know what you guys are getting for education these days. Rod Stewart, he's got an album. Okay, I'll have to bring the album in. Every picture tells a story, don't it? Right? You ever heard the album? Okay, so Rod Stewart, very famous rock and roll singer from the 1960s, 70s. He tells, every picture tells a story, okay? And so in economics, what do? You draw a lot of pictures. You call them graphs or whatever, but they're really a picture telling a story. So if we just told a story that said that I've got this power plant, and what's it doing? It's producing external costs, right? It's producing costs that are going on to somebody else, but it's not being picked up in the price system. So if we were to draw that picture, it would look like this. If I have dollars here and quantity here, and this is the quantity of power that's being produced. Well, I've got a demand for power, which is the marginal benefit, and let's say if we're looking at the market as a whole, okay? So we're really looking at the market as a whole, and let's say there's all sorts of power plants out there, and we're looking at the market demand, et cetera. But these power plants are putting sulfur dioxide out into the atmosphere, and it's causing all sorts of problems, either to fisheries or somebody else like that. Well, you got a marginal cost, which is the private marginal cost, right? So we'll make that, so there's this private marginal cost. But we have this external marginal cost. That is, there's a marginal cost that's being placed on somebody else that's not being picked up. So if what we did was we added, if we made MCT being the total marginal cost, which was equal to the private marginal cost plus the external marginal cost, the total marginal cost is there. Now, what does that mean? We're going to produce this amount at equilibrium, right? And this will be the price. So we have, this is the price that's happening when the price system is not picking up the marginal cost to the other folks. But if we were to do this optimally, if that would be Q star, and we'd have P star that were there. What's the deal? The deal is that I'm going to produce too much of whatever the good is. If I've got a negative externality, if I've got an external cost which is greater that's not being picked up in the price system, then if we think about it, all the units from Q star to QE, what's going on? The marginal cost is bigger than the marginal benefit, right? Because the true marginal cost is along here, and the marginal benefit is along there. And so that triangle ABC is equal to what we might call the welfare loss. So if we don't have a government in there to deal with this situation, then what's the problem? The problem is one of the other conditions of Pareto optimality is not going to hold, right? And so if we were to examine the optimal situation, we'd say optimally we ought to be producing at Q star, but we're not gonna. We could do the same thing if we were looking at a positive externality. If we were looking at a positive externality, and we drew a picture of a positive externality, what would we do? We'd have a marginal cost and marginal benefit is here, but what's going on is that we have dollars here and Q here. What's going on is that that's the private marginal benefit. But if there is an external marginal benefit that's not being picked up, then that would include the private marginal benefit plus the external marginal benefit. And so in that situation, what are you going to have? The market situation is going to be here. You're going to have Q for the market. But again, if we have, what do we have? All those units here have a marginal benefit which is bigger than the marginal cost. Okay? So the marginal benefit is bigger than the marginal cost, so ABC, that ABC is the welfare loss. So you have too little. Too little of the good's going to be produced. We'd rather be up here at Q star, and so the marginal benefit of all those units that didn't get produced are going to be less than the marginal cost. So if you think about it, how many saw the movie Gran Torino? Not too many of you. Okay, you ought to see the movie Gran Torino, right? Clint Eastwood's in it. Anyway, there's a scene in Gran Torino where this kid has to work for Clint Eastwood. And what he does is he has the kid fix up the house that's across the street from Clint Eastwood's house. And why is that? Because that when he fixes up the house across the street, it makes Clint Eastwood's house go up in value, right? In fact, a friend of mine he had a house that he was selling, actually in Fresno, California. But what he did was, well, when he had the house up for sale, he paid the neighbor for the neighbor to mow the neighbor's lawn because it made his house look better. And so, if we just let that, so there's an external marginal benefit that was would happen if the neighbor mowed their lawn. And so, in these cases, what do you have? You have this situation where you don't take into account all the costs that you're imposing on somebody else. If you're letting your house run down, right? Let's say you're in the city of Detroit and you decide not to fix up your house. Well, what'll happen? You only look at the value to you of fixing up your house. You don't look up on the fact that if you're letting your house run down, you're reducing the value of the properties all around you, right? And so what do you get? You get blighted neighborhoods. Why are blighted neighborhoods happening? Well, one of the reasons blighted neighborhoods are happening is because there's a negative externality that you're imposing on everybody else, and there's not a price mechanism to cover that. So what we'll do for next time is we will work our way through externalities, and then we'll talk a little bit about public goods. Again, if you look in the Wolfram folder in the 415 under the textbook, there is a discussion in the textbook about all this, and so you might want to just take a look at that. Now, again, this is still in the draft form. I noticed when I was looking at it yesterday that the figure numbers are wrong. It's figure 2.3, and in the description it says look at figure 3 or whatever. So just take account of the fact that this isn't perfectly there yet. But anyway, it'll help you, I think, to take a look at what we're doing there. All right. So we'll finish. We'll probably finish this this part on Wednesday.